Hello, this is GCSE Psychology Flipped Learning. This is our stages of development, and this is what we are going to do for our pre-learning before we start on our developmental psychology topic. So what we need to know then is the stages that we go through as humans, how we develop through our lifespan, and how that can have an impact on our psychological development. So the first stage that we're going to look at is prenatal development, and this is the development that we go through before we're born. There's three stages we need to just very quickly consider: the germinal stage, the embryonic stage, and the fetal stage. The first one is the germinal stage. This is 2 weeks after contraception, and this is the very, very early stages where you're just a ball of cells called a zygote. This is where you first implant into mum's uterus and you start to grow from there. The second stage, the embryonic stage, is when you start to develop a lot more cells and we start to see some major organs forming. The embryo is very, very delicate, very small at this stage, and can be affected by lots of environmental issues, and this is the most dangerous stage for the baby. Lots of things can happen at this stage, which means the pregnancy won't continue. The third stage, the fetal stage, this is the longest stage, and it goes from 2 months after conception right up until birth at 40 weeks, which is about 9 months. This is where we start to see the rest of the organs form and lots of growth of bone and muscle. So really starting to look much more like a baby. The organs start to work at this point, and although most of the work is still done by mum, they are fully working, and from 24 weeks onwards there is a good chance that baby could survive if it's born. Lots and lots of brain development at this stage. Although babies go through lots of brain development when they're born, they do get born with quite a good brain size. There's lots of things that can have an effect on how well baby develops and if they are born with any problems. And as you can see from the list, they're anything from the diet that mum eats when she's pregnant, right up to whether she is exposed to radiation from X-rays and lots of other environmental issues. Now there are some things on that list. As you can see, we've got alcohol and we've also got drugs on there, and that can cause lots of issues for baby's development before they're born. So much so that they can even be born with things like fetal alcohol syndrome, which means that they are born with an addiction. The second stage that we need to consider is infancy and childhood. Now this is a massive stage in terms of what baby goes through and how much they develop, and we'll have a look at the sorts of things that they do during this stage. Now there are some abilities that you are born with which we call innate abilities, and these are the abilities that will help you survive. And they're very basic abilities in terms of motor reflexes, so things like sucking and grasping, crying and blinking. And they're the types of things that are going to help you survive and get someone to look after you, because you are completely dependent on your growing up at this stage. You will also develop lots of motor skills from this stage. You go from a baby who is not able to get around by themselves to someone who can do lots of different sporting activities, and it takes a long time to get there. We start with the basic things like crawling and walking, and we find that most babies will go through the same process to get to the same motor development. So for example, all babies will crawl before they can walk. Some might crawl for a long time, some might only crawl for a day before they stand up and start walking, but they do need to master that skill before they can move on. There are lots of cultural differences on how well or how quickly baby develops these motor skills, and it tends to be what is socially acceptable at the time and what they've got around them in terms of who's teaching them or who's encouraging them to develop those skills. During this stage, we will also see temperament come out in babies. Now, temperament tends to be that inbuilt characteristics that baby has, whether they are a relaxed, laid-back baby, or whether they're very easy to wind up, whether they're very fussy. Tends to be slightly different to personality. When we've looked at personality previously, we've talked about it in terms of it can change throughout your life. temperament tends to stay the same. This is a really important time for babies in terms of attachment. And attachment is the bond that you have, or the link that you have with your primary caregiver. Now, your primary caregiver can be anybody. It doesn't just have to be mum, it can be dad, it can be grandparents, it can be older siblings. The attachment's formed not necessarily just through food and comfort, but by the interaction in the relationship. So just that person responds to you in a way that makes you feel confident and comfortable. There's lots of research that's been done on attachment. The picture that you can see on the slide is from a research project called Harlow's Monkeys. And although it seems really cool, it has told us an awful lot about how attachments are formed, and also about the impact that can have on you as an adult if those attachments aren't secure when you're a baby. We will also see some gender development in this part of your childhood as well. Now, gender development is slightly different to sex. Sex is based on your biology, and that is there from when you were born. And in most cases, that is either male or female. Gender development is slightly different because it is based on society and what society says is acceptable for males and females. Now, there's lots of research at the moment about whether it is just males and females, whether we should have more gender identifications, and that is what society is deeming as acceptable at the current time. That's very different to what was acceptable 10 years ago or 20 years ago. So gender is something that's very fluid and is changing with society. The next stage we need to think about then is the stage of adolescence. Now, adolescence is the time in your life where you start growing into an adult. It can be very difficult. Some young people get through it with no problems at all. Other people find it a very, very difficult time, and that can be dependent on the other stages that you've been through previously. Stages that we'll see in adolescence then. So the first one then is what we call pubescence. Now, this is the 2 years before puberty, and this is when we start to have lots of physical changes that are getting us ready for puberty. So we'll start to see lots of changes in terms with our sexual characteristics, and they will be different for boys and for girls. Puberty then, when this is when we say that we are sexually mature, so we're able to father or mother or parent a baby. Okay, now that doesn't mean to say that you are mentally able to do that, it just means that you're physically able to do that. And this is happening younger and younger as the generations go on. A couple of generations ago it would have been around the age of 14 and 15, and in some third world countries it's still around that age. In a lot of Western countries and America, that tends to have dropped to around the age of 12. Another issue that you'll have to deal with in adolescence is the idea of identity. Now, there's lots of adolescents that struggle with this one. It can be part of that gender issue as well. It can be a cultural thing. It can be just a lack of social skills. But this is the bit where you start to think about who you are, where you want to be, and where you belong. The final stage that we go through then is the stage of adulthood. Now, this is the biggest stage in our life, and it actually includes lots of other stages along the way. Now, we won't look at these in detail because there isn't an awful lot of psychological development in these stages. The psychological development for this stage tends to be towards the end of it when we talk about the ageing process, and we've got issues like dementia and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease which come in there, along with the normal ageing process where we would see sort of declining cognitive abilities, what we call thinking abilities. There are lots of stages that aren't age dependent, things like marriage or parenthood or the empty nest syndrome or even the midlife crisis. They can happen at different stages throughout the stage of adulthood. So just as a recap then, 4 main stages that we need to think about in terms of psychological development. Most of them that we will look at will be in that infancy and childhood stage, but there are other psychological development stages throughout them all. Okay, so make sure you answer your questions on your worksheet ready for our first lesson when we'll look at Piaget's stages of development.